In the scorching Arizona territory of 1884, where the desert kept its secrets buried beneath endless sand, one mountain trapper made a discovery that defied every law of time and reason. What Ezekiel Stone found in that hastily dug hole would haunt him for years, driving him across territories in search of a woman he'd never met, but whose death he'd already witnessed. The body belonged to someone he would love more than life itself, though their meeting lay years in the future. Her face, preserved by desert conditions, would become his obsession and his curse. Armed with knowledge no man should possess, Ezekiel began a desperate race against destiny itself, determined to save a life that fate had already claimed. This is the chilling true story of a man who discovered his future wife's grave before he ever knew her name, and his impossible quest to cheat death by changing what seemed written in stone. Ready for a story that will chill you to the bone? Hit that like button if you believe some knowledge comes at too high a price. Subscribe and ring that notification bell, because tales like this prove that fate sometimes reveals its plans in the cruelest possible ways. Drop a comment about whether you'd want to know your future if it meant witnessing tragedy. I read every single one. The year was 1884, and Ezekiel Stone had been trapping in the Sonoran Desert for 3 weeks when his water ran dangerously low near what the Apache called the Valley of Silent Bones. The experienced mountain man knew that desert survival meant finding water fast or becoming another skeleton bleached white by the merciless Arizona sun. Ezekiel had learned to read the desert's subtle signs during 5 years of trapping in the territory's harshest regions, following animal trails and vegetation patterns that might lead to hidden springs or seasonal water sources. His trained eye spotted a depression where flash floods might collect rainwater, making it worth investigating despite the energy cost of digging in the brutal heat. The soil proved harder than expected, baked into clay-like consistency by years of scorching temperatures and minimal rainfall. Ezekiel's shovel struck rock repeatedly as he dug deeper, cursing the desert's stubborn refusal to yield the water that meant the difference between survival and becoming another cautionary tale about respecting the wilderness. 4 feet down, his shovel struck something that definitely wasn't rock or hard-pan clay. The hollow sound suggested wood, which made no sense in this desolate location where trees were scarce and human presence even rarer. Ezekiel's survival instincts told him to ignore the discovery and keep searching for water, but curiosity proved stronger than caution. Careful excavation revealed the corner of what appeared to be a wooden casket, though its presence in the middle of nowhere defied logical explanation. No cemetery existed within 50 miles of this location, and the desert's nomadic tribes practiced different burial customs that didn't involve wooden coffins buried in isolation beneath the sand. The casket's construction showed quality craftsmanship despite obvious weathering from its underground imprisonment. Brass fittings had tarnished green, but the wood remained solid enough to protect whatever lay inside from the desert's destructive forces. Ezekiel's mountain pragmatism warred with growing unease about disturbing what was clearly someone's final resting place. Desert survival required making hard choices quickly, and Ezekiel's water situation left no room for sentimental concerns about grave robbing. If the casket contained anything useful for survival, water, supplies, or clues about nearby settlements, his life might depend on examining its contents despite the moral implications of violating someone's burial site. The lid opened with surprising ease, revealing preservation that seemed impossible given the desert's typically destructive climate. Inside lay the body of a young woman, perhaps 25 years old, whose features remained remarkably intact, despite what must have been years of burial in the harsh conditions that reduced most organic matter to dust within seasons. Ezekiel's first thought was professional admiration for the embalming techniques that had achieved such remarkable preservation in desert conditions. His second thought was shock at the woman's extraordinary beauty. with delicate features and auburn hair that seemed to glow even in the harsh sunlight filtering into the makeshift grave he'd accidentally discovered. The woman wore a white dress that might have been a wedding gown, though its style seemed oddly modern for frontier standards. Her hands were folded across her chest in peaceful repose, and a small bouquet of desert wildflowers lay beside her, so fresh they might have been placed there yesterday rather than years ago when the burial presumably occurred. What struck Ezekiel most forcefully was the strange sense of familiarity he felt looking at the woman's face, as if he'd seen her before in dreams or visions he couldn't quite remember. The feeling was so strong, it made his hands tremble as he studied features that seemed burned into his memory despite their first meeting occurring in this accidental grave. A leather journal tucked beside the woman's body contained entries that made Ezekiel's blood run cold. The final entry was dated 3 years in the future, 1887, and described events that hadn't yet occurred, written in elegant handwriting that belonged to the woman whose body lay before him in impossible preservation. "My beloved Ezekiel will find me here," the final entry read, "though he doesn't yet know my name or understand why fate brought him to this place." The vision shows him digging frantically in the desert heat, seeking water but finding love's greatest tragedy instead. Our story begins with this ending and ends where it began, in death's embrace. The journal's earlier entries revealed the woman's name as Isabella Valdez and described her life in the mining town of Copper Creek, Arizona Territory. She wrote about premonitions, dreams of a mountain man with kind eyes and weathered hands, and growing certainty that her destiny was tied to someone she'd never met, but whose face haunted her sleeping hours. Isabella's journal detailed visions of her own death, describing circumstances that matched exactly with Ezekiel's current situation: the desperate search for water, the accidental discovery of her grave, and his horror at finding prophecy written in her own hand. The entries suggested she'd known about this moment for months before her death occurred. The most disturbing revelation came in entries describing Ezekiel's future actions, written with accuracy that suggested genuine prophetic vision rather than coincidental guessing. Isabella had foreseen his decision to travel to Copper Creek, his attempts to prevent her death, and the tragic futility of fighting against destiny that had already been determined by forces beyond human control. Ezekiel's practical mind rejected the supernatural implications of what he'd discovered, but the evidence lay before him in impossible preservation and prophetic accuracy. Isabella Valdez had somehow known about their meeting, had written about events that wouldn't occur for years, and had arranged her own burial in a location where fate would guide him during his moment of greatest need. The water situation that had driven Ezekiel to dig in this specific location suddenly seemed less important than the mystery surrounding Isabella's death and burial. Her journal suggested that their connection transcended normal human experience, binding them together across time and death in ways that challenged everything he understood about the natural world and human destiny. Ezekiel spent 3 more hours reading Isabella's journal in the desert heat, his water crisis temporarily forgotten as he absorbed prophecies that detailed his future with terrifying accuracy. Every entry revealed knowledge no human should possess, describing conversations that hadn't occurred and decisions he hadn't yet made with precision that defied rational explanation. The journal's middle sections contained detailed maps of Arizona Territory, marking locations where Isabella claimed significant events in their shared destiny would unfold. Copper Creek appeared repeatedly, circled in red ink, with notations about specific dates when Ezekiel would arrive, whom he would meet, and how his attempts to change fate would ultimately fail despite his best efforts. Isabella had drawn his portrait in the journal's margins with startling accuracy, capturing details of his appearance that she couldn't have known through normal means. She'd sketched his weathered hands, the scar above his left eyebrow, and the way he held his head when deep in thought, intimate knowledge that suggested supernatural observation across time and space. The most chilling entries described Isabella's growing awareness of her approaching death, written with the calm acceptance of someone who'd seen the future and understood her powerlessness to alter it. She wrote about trying to leave Copper Creek, attempting to avoid the circumstances that would lead to her death, only to find herself drawn back by forces stronger than human will. "Ezekiel will try to save me," one entry read, "but the desert spirits have already chosen our path. He'll arrive in Copper Creek exactly as the vision showed, driven by love for a woman he's known only through death. His heart will break watching fate unfold exactly as written, but our love will transcend the grave that brought us together." Ezekiel's practical nature rebelled against accepting supernatural explanations, but the evidence demanded belief, despite his mountain man's skepticism. Isabella's journal contained too many specific details about his personal history, his habits, and his thoughts to be explained by coincidence or lucky guessing. She'd somehow observed him across time, documenting their connection before they ever met. The water crisis that had led to this discovery resolved itself when Ezekiel noticed moisture seeping into the bottom of Isabella's grave, an underground spring that his digging had inadvertently accessed. Even his survival needs seemed orchestrated by the same forces that had guided him to this exact location at this precise moment in time. Ezekiel carefully reburied Isabella's preserved body after memorizing every detail of her appearance and copying crucial sections of her journal. Something deep in his soul insisted that disturbing her rest further would be both disrespectful and dangerous, though he couldn't explain the source of this conviction or the protective instincts she inspired even in death. The journey to Copper Creek took 6 days through some of Arizona Territory's most challenging terrain, but Ezekiel felt drawn forward by compulsion stronger than curiosity or professional obligation. Isabella's journal had become his roadmap to a destiny he didn't understand, but felt powerless to resist, each mile bringing him closer to a fate written in a dead woman's handwriting. The mining town of Copper Creek buzzed with activity when Ezekiel arrived, its main street crowded with prospectors, merchants, and opportunists seeking fortune in the nearby silver mines. The town matched Isabella's journal descriptions perfectly, down to specific buildings, business owners, and the distinctive red dust that covered everything within miles of the mining operations. Ezekiel's first priority involved locating Isabella Valdez, though her journal suggested she wouldn't arrive in Copper Creek for several more months. Town records confirmed that no one by that name currently lived in the area, but several residents mentioned expecting new arrivals as word of silver strikes spread throughout the territory and beyond. The local saloon served as Copper Creek's unofficial information center, where Ezekiel gathered details about recent arrivals and departures while nursing whiskey and studying faces for any resemblance to the woman whose death had already shaped his future. The bartender, a talkative man named Sullivan, proved eager to discuss the town's growing population and changing character. "We get all kinds through here," Sullivan explained, polishing glasses while surveying his evening crowd. "Miners, gamblers, merchants, women looking for husbands or just looking for opportunity. Sometimes folks show up claiming they had dreams telling them to come here, like the desert spirits are calling them to Copper Creek for reasons they can't explain." Ezekiel's blood chilled at Sullivan's casual mention of people following dreams to Copper Creek, confirming Isabella's journal entries about supernatural forces drawing specific individuals to the town at predetermined times. He wasn't the only one being manipulated by destiny, just the only one who discovered his fate through finding a dead woman's prophetic writings. The local boarding house provided temporary accommodation while Ezekiel established himself as a trapper and guide for mining operations, using skills developed during years in the mountains to earn money and respectability. Isabella's journal had warned that his arrival must appear natural rather than desperate, maintaining the illusion of free will while following destiny's predetermined script. Mrs. Carpenter, the boarding house proprietor, welcomed Ezekiel with the efficient warmth of someone accustomed to temporary residence seeking fortune in dangerous territories. Her establishment catered to respectable men who needed clean rooms and decent meals while pursuing legitimate business in Copper Creek's booming economy, exactly the environment Isabella's journal had recommended for his integration into town society. Ezekiel's days fell into routines that felt both natural and orchestrated, as if invisible hands were guiding his choices while maintaining the appearance of personal agency. He guided mining surveys, trapped game for local restaurants, and gradually became a respected member of Copper Creek's business community, all while watching for signs of Isabella's prophesied arrival. The waiting proved more difficult than any physical challenge Ezekiel had faced during years of wilderness survival, made worse by his growing certainty that Isabella's journal entries were proving accurate in every detail. Each day brought him closer to meeting the woman whose death he'd already witnessed, whose love he'd already experienced through her prophetic writings, whose fate he felt desperate to change despite mounting evidence of his powerlessness. Isabella Valdez arrived in Copper Creek on a dusty stagecoach, exactly as her journal had predicted, stepping onto the main street with the grace and beauty that Ezekiel remembered from her preserved body in the desert grave. The sight of her alive and vibrant struck him with emotional force that nearly drove him to his knees, confirming every supernatural detail recorded in her prophetic writings. She wore the same white dress he'd seen in her casket, though now it was travel-stained and dusty from the long journey across Arizona territory. Her auburn hair caught the afternoon sunlight exactly as it had in death, and her delicate features carried the same ethereal beauty that had mesmerized him during those hours beside her grave in the desert heat. Ezekiel forced himself to remain at a distance during Isabella's first days in Copper Creek, following her journal's warnings about the importance of allowing their relationship to develop naturally, despite his desperate desire to protect her from the fate he'd already witnessed. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene immediately, but her writings had emphasized the catastrophic consequences of rushing their destined connection. Isabella took employment at Henderson's General Store, charming customers with her intelligence and kindness while establishing herself as a valued member of Copper Creek's growing community. Ezekiel watched from afar as she fulfilled every prediction recorded in her journal, her actions matching the prophetic entries with precision that reinforced his growing acceptance of supernatural forces governing their lives. Their first meeting occurred exactly as Isabella had foreseen, when Ezekiel visited Henderson's store for supplies, and their eyes met across the counter displaying ribbons and buttons. The recognition was instantaneous and mutual, though Isabella's journal had prepared her for this moment, while Ezekiel experienced the full shock of meeting someone he'd known only through death and prophecy. "You're the trapper from my dreams," Isabella said quietly, her voice carrying the same musical quality that had enchanted him when he'd imagined it while reading her journal. "I've been seeing your face for months, knowing we'd meet here in Copper Creek, though I didn't understand why fate was drawing us together until this moment." Ezekiel's response carried the weight of terrible knowledge as he struggled to balance honesty with Isabella's journal warnings about revealing too much too quickly. "I've been dreaming about you too," he admitted, which was true, though the dreams had come from reading her prophetic writings rather than supernatural visions. "There's something between us that I don't understand, but can't deny." Their courtship unfolded according to Isabella's detailed predictions, each conversation and shared experience confirming the journal's accuracy while deepening Ezekiel's desperation about the approaching tragedy he felt powerless to prevent. She spoke often about premonitions and strange dreams, testing his reactions while gradually revealing her own supernatural awareness of their shared destiny. "I dream about my own death," Isabella confessed, during a moonlit walk 3 weeks after their first meeting. "I see myself in a white dress, lying in a wooden casket buried in the desert where someone will find me years from now. The vision is so clear that I've already written my will and arranged for my burial, though I pray every night that the dreams are just imagination rather than prophecy." Ezekiel's heart broke, listening to Isabella describe visions that he knew were absolutely accurate. Her peaceful acceptance of approaching death, contrasting sharply with his growing desperation to change what seemed inevitable. Her journal had warned him about this conversation, predicting his struggle between honesty and the dangerous consequences of revealing his supernatural knowledge about their shared future. The source of Isabella's prophetic abilities became clearer as she shared stories about her grandmother, a curandera who'd passed down traditions of desert spirit communication through generations of women in her family. Isabella had inherited not just the gift of prophecy, but also the understanding that some destinies couldn't be altered regardless of advance warning or desperate intervention. Ezekiel's attempts to change their fate began subtly, encouraging Isabella to leave Copper Creek for visits to relatives in California or suggesting business opportunities that might take her away from Arizona territory during the crucial period when her journal predicted her death would occur. Each effort failed as circumstances beyond their control forced her to remain exactly where destiny required her presence. "You can't save me from what's coming," Isabella told him during their final week together, her voice carrying sad certainty about the approaching tragedy. "I've seen how this ends, and fighting against fate only causes more pain for both of us. Our love was meant to transcend death, to connect us across time in ways that ordinary couples never experience." The circumstances leading to Isabella's death unfolded exactly as her journal had predicted, beginning with a mining accident that trapped workers underground and required every able-bodied person in Copper Creek to assist with rescue operations. Isabella insisted on helping, despite Ezekiel's desperate pleas for her to stay safely away from the dangerous situation that would claim her life. The rockfall occurred during the third day of rescue operations, when Isabella was bringing water to exhausted workers deep in the unstable mine shaft. Ezekiel heard the rumble and rushed toward the tunnel entrance, knowing with horrible certainty that destiny was fulfilling itself exactly as prophesied, despite all his efforts to prevent the tragedy he'd foreseen through finding her future grave. Isabella's final moments played out according to her journal's detailed predictions, with her last words expressing love for Ezekiel and gratitude for the time they'd shared despite knowing it would end in tragedy. She died in his arms, exactly as she'd written, her peaceful expression suggesting acceptance of a fate she'd seen coming for months through visions that proved tragically accurate. The burial arrangements followed Isabella's predetermined wishes, with her body placed in the wooden casket she'd commissioned months earlier and transported to the exact desert location where Ezekiel had originally discovered her grave. The circular nature of their story completed itself as he watched the woman he loved being interred in the place where their relationship had actually begun, years before they ever met. Ezekiel's grief was complicated by his unique knowledge of how their story would continue, understanding that Isabella's preservation in the desert grave would eventually lead to their first meeting when his younger self would dig desperately for water in the scorching heat. Their love story existed outside normal time, beginning with death and ending where it started, in the mystery of fate that transcended human understanding. The years following Isabella's burial passed like a waking nightmare for Ezekiel, who found himself trapped in a temporal loop where past and future intertwined in ways that challenged his sanity and understanding of reality. Every day brought him closer to the moment when his younger self would discover Isabella's grave, completing the circle that had begun with prophecy and would end with predetermined destiny. Ezekiel's attempts to warn his younger self proved futile, as time seemed protected by forces that prevented paradoxes or alterations to the established timeline. Letters he tried to mail disappeared, messages he left were destroyed by weather, and his efforts to be present at the crucial moment were thwarted by circumstances that seemed orchestrated by the same supernatural forces that had governed his entire relationship with Isabella. The mining town of Copper Creek gradually declined as silver deposits played out, but Ezekiel remained as a kind of guardian for Isabella's memory and the timeline that had shaped their tragic love story. He became a local legend, the mountain man who'd loved a woman with prophetic gifts and had learned to accept fate's supremacy over human will and desire. Local residents often sought Ezekiel's advice about dreams and premonitions, recognizing in him someone who'd experienced supernatural forces firsthand and had gained wisdom about the relationship between destiny and free will. He counseled them with hard-earned understanding about the dangers of fighting against visions that might represent unchangeable future, rather than warnings that could be heeded and avoided. Some dreams are messages we're meant to receive, Ezekiel would tell those who came seeking guidance about disturbing visions or prophetic experiences. Others are simply glimpses of what must happen regardless of our desires or efforts to change it. The trick is learning to distinguish between warnings we can act upon and destinies we must accept. The anniversary of Isabella's death became an annual pilgrimage for Ezekiel, who would travel to her desert grave to maintain the site and ensure that her casket remained properly preserved for the day when his younger self would discover it while searching desperately for water in the unforgiving heat of the Sonoran Desert. Isabella's journal remained Ezekiel's most precious possession, its prophetic entries serving as both comfort and torment as he watched their predictions unfold with supernatural accuracy. He added his own entries documenting the aftermath of their story, creating a complete record of their love that existed outside normal temporal boundaries and challenged conventional understanding about life, death, and human connection. The supernatural preservation of Isabella's body in the desert climate became a source of wonder for the few people who knew the complete story, suggesting that forces beyond human comprehension were protecting her remains until the moment when destiny required their discovery. Her grave became a sacred site where the boundaries between past and future seemed permeable and mysterious. Ezekiel's own aging process seemed affected by his supernatural experiences, as if his connection to Isabella's prophetic abilities had altered his relationship with time itself. He aged more slowly than normal, remaining strong and alert despite the passage of years, as though he was being preserved to serve some crucial role in maintaining the temporal loop that defined their eternal love story. The approach of 1884 brought increasing tension for Ezekiel, who knew that his younger self's discovery of Isabella's grave was approaching according to the timeline established by her prophetic writings. He found himself drawn to the desert location more frequently, as if invisible forces were preparing him to witness the completion of their circular destiny from a different temporal perspective. Strange dreams began visiting Ezekiel as the crucial year arrived, visions that seemed to come directly from Isabella's spirit rather than his own subconscious. She appeared to him exactly as she had in life, offering comfort and explanations about the supernatural forces that had shaped their relationship and would continue to govern their connection across the boundaries of death and time. "Our love story was never meant to follow normal patterns," Isabella told him in one particularly vivid dream visitation. "We were chosen to demonstrate that genuine connection transcends temporal limitations and physical death. Your younger self will find me exactly as prophesied, beginning our story again in the eternal cycle that binds us together forever." The day of discovery arrived with desert heat that Ezekiel remembered from his own experience years earlier, when desperate thirst had driven him to dig in the exact location where Isabella's preserved body waited to be found. He positioned himself on a distant ridge where he could observe without interfering, watching as destiny fulfilled itself with supernatural precision and perfect timing. Ezekiel's younger self appeared exactly as Isabella's journal had predicted, following the same animal trails and survival instincts that would lead him to the shallow depression where flash floods might collect life-saving water. The older Ezekiel watched with fascination and horror as his own past unfolded according to prophetic script, every action predetermined by forces beyond human control or understanding. The moment of discovery played out exactly as Ezekiel remembered from both perspectives, with his younger self's shock at finding Isabella's impossibly preserved body matched by the older version's renewed grief at witnessing their first meeting through the lens of complete knowledge about how their tragic story would unfold over the years that followed the desert revelation. As his younger self rode away from the grave carrying Isabella's journal and the burden of supernatural knowledge about their doomed love, the older Ezekiel felt a sense of completion mixed with eternal sadness. Their story would continue repeating itself across time, a love that existed outside normal temporal boundaries and demonstrated the mysterious ways that destiny operated beyond human comprehension. The desert wind carried what sounded like Isabella's laughter as Ezekiel watched his younger self disappear into the heat shimmer, beginning the journey to Copper Creek that would lead to love, loss, and the understanding that some connections transcend the normal limitations of life and death. Their circular story had completed another cycle, ready to begin again in the eternal dance between prophecy and reality. Isabella's grave remained in the desert, protected by supernatural forces and waiting for the next cycle of their temporal loop, where love conquered death by existing outside time itself. Ezekiel understood finally that he was not just Isabella's lover, but the guardian of a story that demonstrated the mysterious power of destiny and the eternal nature of true spiritual connection between souls meant to be together across all barriers.